What's going on, everybody? We are back with another devotional here on the channel. And this is our first devotional since we've kind of changed the routine and the schedule for what we're doing. So just as a reminder, we're posting one video a week instead of two. That video is going to be posted on a Tuesday instead of Sundays and Wednesdays. And so just make sure that you're checking back each week on Tuesday for the new devotional. Hopefully in the future weeks, I'll have that posted sooner during the day on Tuesdays rather than in the evening. But it'll come on Tuesday sometime each week, one devotional. So just make sure that you're checking the channel each week to get that devotional. And as I mentioned during our Zoom meeting last week, these devotionals are going to kind of be geared a little bit differently. We're going to be using these devotionals on Tuesdays to remind us of what Pastor Brad taught us on Sunday. So make sure that you're still watching Pastor Brad's sermons on Sunday mornings, that you're participating in the online services each Sunday morning, because these devotionals are going to build on what Pastor Brad is talking about on Sundays. And Sunday, Pastor Brad began teaching us on the Lord's Prayer. And this prayer is something that Jesus taught his disciples to do in response to a request that his disciples made, right? We remember that the disciples asked Jesus, or they made the request to Jesus, Lord, teach us how to pray. And so the Lord's Prayer is Jesus' response to that request made by the disciples. And I think one of the things that's important or helpful, at least for me to remember, is that the disciples needed help learning how to pray just as much as we do. And that's why they asked Jesus this question, because it's very possible and very real in our own lives that there are times when we simply don't know how to pray, or we don't know what to pray for, and things like that. Those are the same things that Jesus' disciples were feeling. And so they asked Jesus the question, and he gives us this prayer in response. And I think it's helpful for us to be reminded that one of the things the Lord's Prayer does, as Pastor Brad mentioned Sunday, is that the Lord's Prayer teaches us and helps us to become better prayers. But we're not studying the Lord's Prayer just so we can feel like we're better prayers, or that we feel like we're better equipped to pray. Those are certainly benefits and positives to studying the Lord's Prayer. But one of the big things about prayer is that prayer changes us. And it's one of the things that Pastor Brad emphasized on Sunday morning during his sermon, is that when we pray, God changes our hearts and helps us to look more and more like Jesus. And so as we become better prayers, and as we become more comfortable with prayer, and as we pray more and spend more time in prayer, our hearts begin to change, and God begins to mold us and shape us to look more and more like Jesus in our lives. And that's a huge, huge piece of what prayer is. And really, this is one of the areas about prayer that sometimes we may think about the least, right? When we think about like the definition of prayer, we often have something along the lines of it's us talking to God. It's something about us going to God with our needs, with our fears, with our thoughts. The thing, we need to have a conversation with God, and that is absolutely true. But one of the things that prayer does, one of the reasons why prayer is so important in our lives, is because it's one of the things, really one of the biggest things that God uses to change us and to change our hearts. He uses prayer to do that, maybe more than anything else. That when we pray, God changes our hearts to look more like his heart. So as we begin this journey talking about the Lord's Prayer during the next several weeks, going along with Pastor Brad's sermon series on Sunday mornings, there's a few things that I want you to do starting this week just to kind of begin thinking more about prayer and the Lord's Prayer specifically. The first one is that I want you to read the Lord's Prayer 2 to 3 times a day, each and every day. It's not very long. It's like 4 or 5 verses. And so this is something that's going to take you a couple of minutes max to do each day, to read it 2 or 3 times. And so I'd encourage you to do that. Spend time reading it 2 to 3 times each day. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to memorize the Lord's Prayer. We're going to memorize a longer version of it from Matthew chapter 6, verses 9 through 13. And so beyond reading it and learning more about it, it's also going to help familiarize us with the passage, which will give us this foundation to jump off of as we begin to memorize this passage starting next week. So go ahead and spend a little bit of time each day, 2 to 3 times, read through it. I promise you'll benefit from that. The second thing that I want you to do is I want you to think about these 2 questions. The first question is this: what is something that you find difficult about prayer? We mentioned it earlier that at times we all can find prayer difficult. Maybe it's that we don't know what to say, or maybe it's we don't know how to pray. We don't feel comfortable praying about a specific thing or at a specific time, right? There's a number of different things that can cause us to feel like prayer is difficult. Maybe it's the circumstances going on in our life. Maybe it's the current condition of our heart where we just really don't feel like praying. Maybe it's the fact that we feel like we're not good at praying, and so rather than learning about it or practicing and doing it more often, we just simply give up and don't try it at all. And so I want you to think about that question. What is something that you find difficult about prayer? And answer that question, and then spend some time this week praying to God about it, asking Him to help you in that area specifically related to prayer and your prayer life. The second question is this: what is one way that prayer has changed you to be more like Jesus? We talked about the fact that prayer is one of the things that God uses to change us to look more like Christ. And so what is an area in your life that God has used prayer to make you look more like Jesus? Like I said, these two questions may pop up in a Zoom meeting in the coming week or so. So I'd encourage you to think about them, answer them. I'm not going to force you to share your responses to these questions, but I would really encourage you, if you've thought about them, if you've got answers, to share those things, because I think it's going to be something that's going to encourage all of us and challenge us as well to continue learning to pray together. And as a bonus assignment, go find a family member and sit down and have a conversation with them and ask them specifically how you can be praying for that specific family member during the week. And then just spend some time this week praying for that family member. It can be your mom, it can be your dad, it can be a sibling, whoever you want it to be. But pick a family member, have a conversation with them, ask them how you can be praying for them, and then just spend some time praying for them. They don't have to be long prayers. They don't have to be elaborate prayers, but just practice praying for your family this week as a response to beginning talking about the Lord's Prayer. Well, that's it for this devotional, y'all. Hope you found it encouraging. Hope you found it helpful. Hope it gave you something to do, as always. Looking forward to catching up with y'all during our Zoom calls later on this week. And so until then, just want to remind y'all that I love y'all. I'm praying for y'all, and if there's anything that I can do to help y'all, please don't hesitate to let me know.